Cool guys. Good to be here, man. Thanks for the watch. So, good news before I dive into the story today. Here you will hear more interesting stories apart from listening to those of yours so far. Give it a watch. For support more. Find all these down there in the description box below. Go. It was subliminal so small that it had hardly emerged into reality. We have been married for a really, really long time. Like each other, couples do sometimes face ups and downs. In one way, this was kind of different all over. It is so inexplicable. My wife became more distant to an extent. At this moment of silence that wasn't silent, when once all kinds of laughter reigned the room. Actually, though the fire itself in the house that exploded into flames of sparks did not really get much out of it either. Going to my grandparents at that time, on the other hand, did not exactly do much favor to them too, since going through some very bad times subsequent to the house fire was not exactly like a clean slate kind of moment. And of course, it is all pretty much just spun around down there for just nothing else besides the fire in the house, to complain over it all really. And it's just kind of stuff like that. She comes home from the office after darkly grouching some moron conference or what, where she would place the cell phone anywhere she would go to in the kitchen. It now strongly clings quite decidedly to her palm because it shows me the screen tilted away. And then, of course, nights, conveniently, there would be a ready excuse of forgetfulness on the part of some hot that her wedding ring could not fit anymore. I would have loved everything in this relationship just to be swept under the rug so that it is forgotten how, with every kind of relationship, such circles would recur. Most probably it would again be just one of those moments to be thrown back like this. Once again, but this time to reacquire that which was before as the primary stage once again. Having passed the time, and it was too early in the day, he somehow made him realize, much like the previous time too, not that I wasn't, but then perhaps I'm the one out there trying today. Not melodramatic. It somehow, through the tide of years, sweeps across each day. I asked if maybe the evening of that night she'd sit with me and watch one of the shows that she was told was watched maniacally as a true fan would. She would look up, and before me that look was there that tried to be an equation solver in algebra. "No, I am tired," she said without almost looking up from. This now appears to get late at night. That catches her for the TV that she is also laughing into the thing, and is then very intense with the depth of coverage with the show. No comedy, one of the segregated kinds when things are shareable between two of them. He or she should be the exact one who makes you live through life for true. This was performances already that one would not overlook, restrained, as if another man would. I was trying to talk myself down, so to say, at a certain level by asking myself if I were not being hypersensitive. Fact stared in my face, though. That small provocation, that wardrobe change, and a complete absence of any physical intimacy were headed one way only. She's never bored being my wife. She is very serious, either thinking about it or very much believes very seriously is well-to-do. I wanted to talk to her, however did not know how to do this. Are you screwing me? That's not what gets served for dinner. So I waited. I watched. Patterns emerged. How, ex nihilo, she forgot that she was otherwise engaged. How her voice changed on being named among other speakers at discussion. She did not merely withdraw as distance. She was out of the way of being an already at any rate inside the head. It is living with an estranged member of the family in the same roof. This is old age itself locked inside, vainly trying to listen, vainly trying to remember. Perhaps this is merely another final thought in everything leaving the bag of self. She has made it pretty painless not to be there for anyway. This quiet, still voice still clings to me like some sort of hope. I should let her have the devices that she'd, by now and surely know exactly who to turn the screw on this crap, I figure. Can't just get up and walk out of life for one good scrap who you both worked at with as much effort as this together. Not that day suspicion ran in me, but the waiting for. Waiting that she would snare one lie. Wait for her to come to a place where she would be able to confess things that I already know. Wait for something, except she only nagging, peeking to look indignant, as if not caring altogether. I could breathe in coming closer to further, in a way, to inevitable doom. Perhaps even she had meant so. From the sundown of such a day, everything falls and crumple in all the places that were spent during the whole day in the office working indoors. Nothing moves. Winter was quite cold, that made it set the sun a little earlier since everything was all crumpled with colors so somber. I took the turn down on a curve on the driveway. Everything is just not right. My car nowhere in the garage, and the porch lights gone out. Nothing more than that. All else dragging heavy in my belly, folding over with all the aches and pains above that throb. I called her.
She didn't hear me.
Nothing ever would have said otherwise. I knew she was gone. My eyes still kept on the house as lights upstairs in that room began lighting up, and I went upstairs and reached out to embrace her. She was just standing up right there before this dresser applying on makeup of some kind. Not really trying much to rise to get properly dressed to be made up. Jeans and sweater. She was dressed in long formal black dressing. This was the first time for me and her to see. She had a strain on her top spot, not too hard for it, so high though. That of its own with a stool for sit. Next were stilettos heels. Tall so that they're come and then be gone about them. That was the first, to my knowledge, for that style in any shoe she had ever worn. I'd just stand there staring at her. Lipstick red in color to paint on with barely a sipped teardrop of not quite much of a bird's eye view for me. A dime in the air and then suddenly, without forewarning, takes off running in to kiss someone. This has only just now been enough to have a drink of the cocktail before cocktail hour to be seated there with her date. She is dressed to impress to go out with a person. I was standing upright, though not shrieking, so I didn't ask her all those shrieking questions for her to shriek back at me. All I whispered to her shell-like ear was, "Do we get out of here somewhere?" She froze, glaring at me through the mirror, without a scintilla of apology or shame, but of irritation. "No way," she snapped. I step out. They invited me to step out. Stood there dumbfounded. How she prepared for explosion may scream, cry, and fall down all her fault to me, but sits down staring me. "Can you hear?" Sneers that face, voice like gritty grains of sand. "I tell you, I have date. Meet a man." My very thumping heart inside there still refuses to allow dramatized, as well, lets her try then.
"No."
I straightened an arthritic frame and turned myself to her. Arms crossed above the breast and pouting lower lip. "No," she repeated. I raised my eyebrows roughly. "Do not go out with anybody?" "Fine, but not till we live together. You want to get out and screw the brains out of some poor schmuck, that's okay, and all just fine. You get up and grab your case and get the hell out of my house. The minute you do, I sit down and start penning out the divorce papers. Then, my poor dear friend, you're as free as the bird. Screw any and anybody you damn please." She simply waved that aside with wickedness in a grin on her lips. "I'm not coming, neither you nor anybody else," she sneered. "I like it here. And when it's mine, I'll do with it what I want to. If you keep acting the fool, when we sell this dump, I'll make sure that I get most of the dough." She gulped an enormous amount. I managed another peek at what was left in the last shards of self-esteem I could retrieve. "I do. Let's do ourselves a favor," I said. "Go on home now, live with your parents, till all of this gets straightened out. You want out of us, not me." "Oh, I'll be back in 30 minutes, she said. "You'd better not be here when I get back. If you are, I'll call the police. I'll tell them you threatened me, maybe even hit me. You know how it works. They'll hold you for 48 hours, and by then, I'll have changed the locks." A chill anger settled inside of me. She really thought she could manipulate me that easy. "You are really making a big mistake," I said, relieved to hear my voice sound steady. "You think you can scare me off, but I am going nowhere." She shrugged and stepped back from the mirror. She began talking for a long time on some abstractions of lipstick. Walk out of that room. The cards she had played against me were swirling in my head. She didn't even know me. "It seems if this is how you wanted things to go on, to get a bit dirty together, fine with me. Go get dirty, you'll play along." And there, leaning against the wall nigh to the floor to which my eyes had been drawn by the aluminum baseball bat, was that very bat with which we had played games for friends during our summers. She rises to her feet to bend forward to grasp the bat at the place where weight of its mass permits it to swing freely in my hand. Her car is outside. Almost could feel the satisfactions they must be thinking to see that face all greasy, like bobbing inside my skull, with all that inside my angst stewing away on that same thought of driving off somewhere to some assignation with this lover or that, and me left to stew inside my angst. Not tonight, though. I pointed it back in there, cocked under her cloak, clasped her to me, curled my hand round my head, and hauled her down under my chin to peep into that cavity and locate that battery. Now pull it on out of here and drag it on over to my workbench. Purse with cell phone. Hammer swiped through, slit 3 ways across the face of it. Thick-headed cell phone to begin with. It was still in a case. Then, out of luck now. No one to knock on. No one home tonight to knock. And then, in the space of 1 second, another of these ghosts. I am looking at this. I was concentrating on something. Packet of condoms. At least, I can open it with the help of a needle just for fun's sake. It is only that thrill of doing, so when she's caught completely offhand. She was when I had once again realized that she can point her finger upon me and give me conviction too, and that she won't need that kind of anything anymore now. She had gotten up and out of the room in frolic dress, after all. It was a black suit, at any rate. Her feet were firmly planted in her proper owned shoes that red she could not resist from, of course, the jarringly clashing savage red lipstick. The sidelong glint was thrown at me with irritation already. She walked precariously and demanded every right to show herself off. Oh, and out. She nodded toward the door and as some intruder. I could only resist winking. I stood up, walked forward to get myself a cup of coffee, went back, leaned myself against the counter, slowly dripping it down. That's as far as you go tonight. She looked at me tough. What do? She shouted at a raising pitch. I smiled, had some more. Oh, we'll go. Go see your car, my sweet lady,
I said.
She stamped out the front door, clicking heels in wild surging up and down every yard of pavement. And after more time had gone on, still yelping me, irritated, thwarted, incensed. Still well short of reaching the house, her face puce red. She had been red all over in the face by anger. What devil is it you have done with my car? She was pointing at me. I smiled friendly. It is in the street. Who knows what comes? Well, you rogue, you just telephone and ring up, get him in here, take me. Set that against your conscience, she said, waving towards the handbag. That out. She pushed back the revolver. She shrugged, ground her teeth together, and dived inside the bag to poke her fingers deep into and produced a mobile flung almost distastefully high into the air. The difficulty is it won't turn on. She screwed her face up by a superhuman effort to scrunch up at me. You smashed my mobile telephone. I folded my arms across my chest and slumped back into my chair. Perhaps you should have been a bit more aware of your handbag. Meanwhile, she flung into hysterical passion, was pulled from running shoes into pumps and ran out past, going round to the front door of some neighbor, knocking there for somebody to let her in so that she might telephone in to the neighbor. She rapped at the doors of little cottages, and 1 or 2 of them could swear that nobody was at home, but the futility attained a shrieked pitch at the far end of the street at last. While sipping my coffee, she'd finally come up with some slimy opponent to get her out of that mess, or despair overtakes her to the point whereby she calls in the number calling the cops in. That worked for me pretty well since I was primed for anything in order to lead to a crashing thunder. She thought she is calling the shots. I almost felt near the sun of rising, which would have made me on my way. Tonight she'll find some woe. Before declining sun this day. In past days, nothing was working for not traveling along my path. Things were happening that had things appear altogether pretty grim. I'd drawn lattes, it seemed endless, and I recalled to listen to her shuffle along down the hall quiet as a. That's my cue. I see her turn down the end of our driveway. She is moving off with a turnaround to curve into down the driveway and into the garage. Of course, she isn't going to let that happen. And the thing was, I knew Sandy. Impulsive, yes, but predictable. In her desperation, she must already have realized that she wasn't going anywhere in her car, and probably assumed that I had left my Suburban the Beast, as she used to call it, sitting in the garage, ready to save her night. She didn't know I'd pulled the plug out of the garage door opener. Perhaps she had some damp gesture in mind for me, if her schedule allowed for it. I said nothing. I fell into stride alongside her, pacing that way to keep pace, as she vaults up into the driver's seat of the Beast. The engine roars to life. It was one heck of a roar that might be able to rattle doors off a garage. And then I get in the car door. I'll just go in there for a minute. I let her figure it out on her own. She pushes the garage door opener. The garage door won't move. She presses it again. The garage door won't move. A flash of anger crossing her face, but a moment too gruesome to let herself think what she should do. Sandy does something awful. She reaches out and touches the gas. The crash. And screams back the garage door. It screams of jagged metal despair. My spine freezes over. Like the raw power of 454 horses was too much to tear through those old doors. Tear confetti pieces underneath the storm by tearing through that garage of the beast says it all already. But worse, really, was what happened behind that garage. The worst position ever is a parked police cruiser. Time keeps passing. Here, at the present moment, 2 officers appear, surely on account of veiled threats Sandy has been tossing at them, starting with his threat that he is going to call the police. The beast crashed into the front of the cruiser so hard it crumpled accordion fashion across the hood. The cruiser slid back several feet. But one hadn't yet opened the driver's door of the truck when this crash occurred. One could have shoved open that driver's door swinging when surprised like this. Now, he crashes backward again down on the pavement. Now his brother with that red hair started acting also, the one that I am only vaguely reminding of from all the hallways in high school. She hadn't yet had a crack at being drilled through on what was going to happen when already the policeman is dragging her out from under the monster by clumps of hair. Yelling back at him in the mud, she was yelling loudly enough to make darn sure her voice rang clear above the neighborhood. Sandy was screaming some incomprehensible words, kicking at her side as it was dragged down onto the asphalt. She did not even try to fight. She was just screaming and shrieking and bellowing her head off, weeping and cursing the minute the cop cinched the cuffs around her wrists. I sprinted to see what he'd been through, slamming the stunned cop into the air. Blood sprayed everywhere. His bridge is most definitely broken, the least of my worries anyway, and yet somehow he stays alive. Stop rolling around, I growled, jerking his head back against the floor, so he wasn't wrenching it this far to one side. They're getting in the reinforcements. Epilogue. Of course, it's all just a blur into some kind of all-jumble mess of confusion for the next 20 minutes. Peer out, neighbors peer from behind windows. The bolder ones get out onto the sidewalk and stare. More ambulances, more red lights churning maniacally, more police cruisers closing off the street. I returned to my questions, looking over to Sandy, pressed into another squad car, wrists bound in handcuffs clinking with the rustling of dill pickle candy thief. And off to the hospital she was sent, an injured ego, neck sore from the airbag and charges piling up. Reckless endangerment, property damage, assault on a police officer with a motor vehicle, to name a few. And here I stand, in the driveway as they pull out of wrecks of the beast. I should be angry. I am not. I'm not even annoyed. I'm relieved. It was finally having proof of it. Real, tangible proof that Sandy was her worst enemy. All her threats and manipulation and posturing, in the end, came up against the wall, literally and figuratively. I almost felt that I was coming in for my first breath in months. She folded her arms across her breasts and looked at me as though personally I were the betrayer in some supreme fashion in which she did not know at all. Which is pretty ironic of the circumstances themselves, if one could think along. You leave me with nothing, she sneered at last. 'Tis not as a matter of course, she said graciously to my lawyer. We may as well give you one of the sitting room's apartments, simply out of mercy. I could see how hard it was for her not to grind her teeth. Without another word spoken, she walked out and left her lawyer to improvise on the details of the rest of the will. By the end, pretty much evidence, she was left with her car and some money she withdrew, little else. Her attorney finally figured things did not go her way, approached her, said she should clean up the mess now before everything went south this way, for everybody worse. All very well and good when the gavel fell. Well, he had left me little enough in the divorce, no soft mush of sentiment. This was the judge who this morning would have much to say about my scrupulous attention to my effects, this, his not-so-subtle means of informing me that Sandy had outwitted him in all possible ways, and swept up the mess she had technically gotten herself into by driving the beast into a police car. Never of revenge to me, but of survival. Sandy wanted to play only one game in a little mini-set. Let's play on. Scare herself into getting all that she had so much aspired for. Thus ended. She thought me not good enough, obviously. She really threw me down at fault. Playing at some games my friend has chosen rather than to win now I tid ha Esteban luck another game of a dragon, and she has done at last of this right, and then came in with respect unto herself. Till the dust grew settled, the ink had to dry on several papers of divorce, so that once more I'd catch my breath. First off, it's weird to put a foot inside the life of anybody. She was my routine, my mind, even my happiness for years. And now? And she wasn't. Was just missing. The house still quiet, but no longer lonely. More still, I actually had begun thinking for myself, as opposed to creeping around like not to disrupt anything for her. This had nearly 3 months trying to get the house set in order, to catch up with old friends whom one hadn't seen since college days, and to re-immerse oneself again into hobbies not seen for many years. It was as if one had no hope of stopping that one from mulling over about the place. Since heaven knew who was me after the whole place caught hell. These had always stayed the antics of a shooting range. It never found the time for this married life of mine to get on track these last years with my wedding. Among them one such pilgrimages that met Sergeant Sweetie, by mistake, who had greeted Sandy on the same day Garage took off. She was wearing jeans and an absolutely gorgeous informal top. Absolutely nothing could be more unlike the uniformed, no-nonsense character I knew. We chatted for hours, chatted long, and finally ended up not married. Her divorce had been nasty bad, but certainly wasn't near as bad as mine had been. And it had been established already that one thing followed another. Before I knew what the next thing was, I was taking her out. She completely bowled me over with her yes. Good marriage. Subject of the first date high stuff. All dressed up informal. Round the corner from the left-hand side way, for all intents and purposes. Maybe too formal in any case. She will at least hear about it first, assured. And at this point in time, at least she will understand that I am going that extra mile. Not brain surgery on identity and drama, as that stretches far beyond my profession. By definition, not good enough for herself, far and away out of her league. Neither has been a case that even. We marry 9 months later. And frankly, it's a wonderful rotten time. Except my wife. We raise a life based on trust and respect, 2 aspects of which I would have wished the first time with Sandy. Parts of her life she shared with me by acquaintances that knew her. Marry her again. For the second time. And from what I could make out, I would say her second husband maintains control over her. Good man, I suppose. I do not feel any anger at her, however. Not any too soon now. I well can see in what my keeping back is only just of old this drove this inside where the angers kept and couldn't keep this spilling onto such hallowed hell. Life is good these days. Going quite smooth with the sweetness of its life in recent times. Afloat down the stream of Europe. It really is our 25th anniversary.
She had always wanted to see this.
All grown up, blooming children all of them, and no prouder of children am I today. We gave to our daughter this last week Grandma's old home. It belongs to us so far as marks our 25th anniversary being given to it as a wedding gift.
Yeah.
And finally the circle will be complete, for sitting on those walls soaked with pain and transformation to it now. Here she sits, Sandra, and I speak in passing conversation old days of depression.
God's goodness.
Learnt loads of whom this Sandra is who this Sandy may carry. Life does not tarry for it. Sometimes it was just the curves and turns in this area not fitting into the spot we got, but turned entirely inward and stood. Standing here now,